we kept sending. Yeah.
Are we ready, guys? Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our public budget hearing. I don't think we need a vote to kick it off since it's announced and part of our Open Meetings Act. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. P, or is it Ms. Jones starting us out?
Ms. Jones will kick us off, starting with our budget presentation.
Good evening. Tonight we're having a public budget hearing to discuss the FY26 budget that we have presented in detail at the January work session and then again at the January Board of Education meeting. So my goal is not to go into detail representing the same materials tonight. It's really for us to be here to hear from the public and get any input or comments or respond to questions from the public. So I'm just going to talk for about 3 minutes and then we'll open it up to the public. We don't currently have anybody signed up to comment, but we can, I suppose, ask for that from the audience as well. So the budget process is a long one. We start in the fall and it concludes in June. So we're about halfway through. At this Wednesday night, we will be asking the board to vote on approving the budget, and we will be submitting this to the county council by next week sometime. As you know, we consider several factors when we are preparing our budget, including the needs of our students, how students are performing, and requirements of the blueprint. Our students are diverse. They come from a variety of backgrounds and have a variety of challenges that we need to address when we're considering their education. The blueprint has 5 pillars, and we are working to continue to implement and more fully implement those pillars in our delivery of education to our students. So at this public budget hearing, I'm just going to be talking about the budget as we presented it in January. When we get to the work session portion of the evening tonight, I am going to be presenting some changes that have happened just to update you in terms of revenue and some other things that have gone on, but that's for the next session. So, and they're not particularly significant. So I think it's fine for us to just talk about the budget as it was presented in January at this point. So we are looking at a budget with a $3.4 million increase in our unrestricted revenues. combined $3.4 million increase in both our unrestricted and restricted budgets. So we get funding from the state and local government that is unrestricted, and then we apply for grants and are awarded grants through federal, state, and local programs, and those grants are what are considered restricted. In total, that's what makes the engine run. We need both that unrestricted state support as well as the restricted grants to deliver the programming and employ the people that we have. So we kind of need to look at the entire works. We don't spend a lot of time as we're going through our budget review process focused on the restricted grants. If you'd like to look at those in more detail, they are in the back pages of the budget book. But I have them summarized by federal, state, and local here. And the reason it's important for us to think about that is because I don't know if this pointer's working. Yellow light. There we go. While it looks like we have a really big increase, and we do have a really big increase in our unrestricted budget, an $8.7 million increase, the reason for that is because we lost a lot of funding grants-wise in the last year. We have a $5.3 million decrease in the amount of grants that we have to operate the school system next year. So that sort of needs to be shifted to the local. So overall, we're looking at a $3.4 million increase in our budget, which is a 3.6% increase year over year. So I just want to point that out. So what's making up the increase? We have, first of all, we are just at the point where we're starting negotiations with our negotiating units, and so it's not we were not too far of specific negotiations, but we have put in, of course, a placeholder to provide an increase for our staff, and that's all staff, certified staff, support staff, administrative staff. We also will talk about some additional positions that we are advocating for the next year. There's always an insurance cost increase. We don't really have any control over that. OPEB, other post-employment benefits, we'd like to make a contribution there. There was not a contribution in our FY25 budget. Other fixed charges kind of go hand in hand. Those are our benefits cost, and those go hand in hand with our salary costs. So as our salary costs go up for staff increases and new positions, those other fixed charges are going to increase. And then we've been paying for summer school out of grant funding. So for us to now include that in our local budget, as we call it, in other words, our unrestricted budget, that's an increase to us. Also, we are getting funding for community schools, and that funding is designated for specific purposes. So we are adding some nursing support at 2 of our schools, especially for that after school and evening hours for our students and families. And we have other contracted services with the community schools as well. And then we have, in the last several years, we've been paying for a lot of our technology needs through grants. And again, those grant funds are no longer. So we have student devices and other hardware increasing and software increasing by a little over $1 million. We have some materials of instruction pieces. We're constantly having to renew or refresh our materials of instruction. And again, we've been getting a lot of support in those costs the last couple of years through grants, which are no more. We are looking at a new program for school security that we'll be talking about tonight at the work session. And the cost of that is $213,000. And then our bus lease payments will increase by $241,000 next year. So the new positions are something that we feel strongly about. We have a total of 33 new positions, which on the surface sound like a lot, but we feel that with the strategic goals that we have, which are academic equity and achievement, retaining and recruiting high quality and diverse staff, and creating and maintaining an engaging environment for staff and students. These are the positions that are necessary. So I have 3 slides of these, and we've tried to sort of indicate also where these positions fit into the blueprint for Maryland's future, and which are represented by the red, blue, purple, and light blue columns. Trying to indicate sort of where those positions help meet those blueprint objectives. So in sum, we track our expenses in 12 categories, as we are asked to do by Maryland State Department of Education. And you can see here that our costs are presented, both the budget and actual for fiscal year 24, our budget for the current year, and what we are requesting for next year in the second to right column. And you'll see that our budget, our unrestricted budget, is $85.8 million, which is an $8.7 million increase over FY25. And the reason for those increases are some of those things we talked about on the previous slides. Again, this is the same way, a different way of looking at those same costs, just sort of by, a different way of looking at them, I guess is what I would say. So the majority of our cost, as always, are salaries and wages. Those are general instructional salaries. Those are special education instructional salaries, all the support staff salaries, admin salaries. Contracted services includes anything we contract out. It also includes software, which is a pretty big component of that line item. Supplies and materials includes not only materials of instruction, but also other just general supplies. So it could be maintenance supplies like custodial supplies or office supplies, but a big part of that is materials of instruction. Other charges, majority of that is things in our fixed charges, all of our fixed charges. So all of our employment taxes, our health insurance, our state retirement contributions, our OPEB contributions, as well as all of our insurances and utility costs are in other charges. Land, buildings, and equipment, the 2 biggest items in there are bus lease payments and computer hardware, and all the other, not just the hardware, the devices that the kids are using and our staff are using, but all the infrastructure that goes, the servers and the wiring and all that stuff. So this is a summary of how that's going to be funded, that $85.8 million. If you look at the column second from the right, this is a total. What you haven't seen before is the breakout of this total between what we'll be getting from the county and what will be coming from the state, because at the time we presented this in January, we didn't have those details yet. So the majority of our funding, as usual, comes from the local government, and we get it in these buckets. The foundation funding is the least restricted bucket of funding. Compensatory education needs to be spent on certain activities that provide additional supports for our students. English learners is tagged for our students who are English as second language multilingual learners, and the additional supports they need. Special education, college and career readiness, we use that to support dual enrollment, as well as our CTE programs. You can see that's not a big pocket of money based on what we're spending. This is in, one could say, a underfunded area. And so we use, when we don't have enough money in an area to support what we're doing, we draw on the foundation funding. And that's why it's really important that we have this large bucket of sort of money with as few strings attached to it as possible to fill in the other buckets where we need it. Special education is another area where we do not get enough funding, and so we supplement that from the foundation programming. Pre-K goes toward our pre-K teachers, and that's about all that it covers. Concentration of poverty. These are these community schools that we have, which are and that doesn't seem to add up correctly. So, because I'm going to pause for a second because I realize, I apologize. I realize that I've been telling you wrong. So this we're going to go into this at in the next session. I do apologize. This break in this slide we haven't yet. Okay. In this slide we have not broken out FY26 into the two columns. I was getting ahead of myself. I was thinking about my next presentation, so I apologize. So what you'll see when we do the presentation for the work session is I'll have this column, the FY26 budget, broken out between local and state. So that is, I've been just telling 3 minutes. I apologize. You can see though that our community concentration of poverty funding is going up a lot. It's going up by $1.2 million next year, and that's because we're bringing 3 additional schools on board and just ramping up the funding at certain Easton Elementary and Easton Middle School. National board certification pays for the additional pay that our national board certified teachers are entitled to. Transportation covers our transportation cost. This is what we are asking. This $5.9 million is what we are asking for the county council over and above what they are required under formula funding to provide us. This is a $3.1 million increase over what we are getting this year, which was $2.8 million over what they were required to give us under formula funding. And then this other miscellaneous, it's in the, you'll see it in our next presentation as in the local column. It's not from the county. It's mainly comprised of interest and a few other miscellaneous sources of income, such as building rentals and out-of-county tuition and things like that, but pretty much interest. So that really wraps up the operating budget, and then we have a 5-year look at our capital budget for FY26. We really are just asking for funding for 2 projects. The first being the chapel completion of the renovation and expansion of Chapel School, and then we would like to provide St. Michael's with the same stadium light upgrade that we previously provided to Easton High School by converting those lights to LED, just a better playing experience for those athletes. The county pays debt service on the funding that they use to fund our major construction projects. And so this is something they're going to be thinking about when they're figuring out how much money to budget for us. So I just wanted to make the council aware it doesn't pass through our books, but it is a consideration. So before we adjourn, that's the budget in a nutshell.
Did any of our audience members wish to make a public comment on the budget? So I guess we would move right into the work session. Did we adjourn? Okay, gotcha. Okay, then we'll adjourn until it's time to start the work session in about 10 minutes. Okay, can I get a motion to adjourn the public budget hearing?
I move to adjourn the public budget hearing for the FY26 budget.
A second.
Okay, we'll adjourn until 5:30.
Okay, thank you, everybody. And thank you, Ms. Dodson, for opening our meeting for us. We are finished with our public budget hearing. It was a lively meeting. Just kidding. We're going to move along to our work session. So if we could please start with the Pledge of Allegiance, that would be great. Do I have a motion to approve our work session minutes from January 13th, 2025?
I make a motion to approve the work session minutes from January 13th.
Do I have a second?
Second. I'll second.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, and I accidentally skipped over the approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion to approve tonight's agenda?
I make a motion to approve tonight's agenda.
Second. Second.
All those in favor? Any opposed? Okay. Our work session tonight, we have two topics. The first is our FY26 proposed budget discussion with Mrs. Jones.
Good evening. I thought what we would do tonight for this work session is kind of work through the budget in this order. Wanted to give you an update on our revenue projections that were given out after our January board meeting. And then I want to talk a little bit about some proposed legislation and the impact it might have on our budget. Want to talk about all those comments from the public budget hearing. And if we get through that, then we can talk about other considerations the board has, questions and other things you'd like to address, and then come up with what you would like me to make change-wise, if any, to the budget so that we have a budget to vote on Wednesday night. So first of all, in the left-hand column there, under 115-2025, that is the budget as presented in January. It involved expenditures and revenues totaling $85.8 million. Subsequent to our board meetings, we got our official revenue projections from the Maryland State Department of Education, and we had some differences, which overall were favorable to the net of $562,000. Just going to talk through the reasons for a few of those differences. Special education is one I don't have a good reason for. It's probably the difference of a few students, but I am going to look into that a little bit. I'm not sure what that is. College and career readiness, I'm not sure. It's probably a student or two. Pre-kindergarten, when I had come up with my estimate of 2.9 million, I was specifically excluding some students who were supposed to be funded because last year those students at the last minute they pulled the funding for them. Those are students a little more affluent. They're called tier 2 students. Tier 1 are the poorest students and students with specific needs. So at any rate, I was a bit conservative, and I was pleased to see that when we got our actual appropriation estimate that the students I had excluded are going to be included. So that's the reason that revenue jumped by $228,000. Concentration of poverty, two things going on there. One is that that's a really, really complex calculation of how that's funded, and I do struggle with that a little bit. So Easton Elementary's funding, there's two pieces to concentration of poverty funding. There's a flat amount every school gets called the personnel grant, meant to pay for certain positions, the blueprint coordinator position, a school nurse if that's needed. We don't typically need that, and some other positions. So that amount is pretty easily known, but there's a per pupil amount that comes into play after you've been a community school for a certain number of years and you've submitted a plan that's been accepted, your needs assessment. So what really shocked me was they are saying that Easton Middle School, which will only be in year 2 of being a community school, is entitled to per pupil funding for next year. And I have asked 2 different individuals up at MSDE if that's really correct or if maybe that's an error. And so far I've been told it's correct. We'll look into it further. So for now, going to take it at face value and I want to let you know about it. I am going to continue to look into that because I don't want to be counting on revenue that we're not going to be getting. I'm working with the 2 community school coordinators of what their needs are for that, because unlike, say, additional pre-K revenue, that's just great. That's money that drops to our bottom line that helps us fund our pre-K cost. But with community or concentration of poverty funding, if we're getting more money, we have to demonstrate we're spending more money. So good, we can come up with more programming. I'm in the process of getting that information. Hopefully I'll have that in time to kind of update our expenses for Wednesday night. Blueprint coordinator. This was another great discovery I had last week. In over here, I had budgeted $22,500 for that position. And the reason for that is I was unaware of, I think it's House Bill 1086 that passed last year, which requires local governments to kick in the difference between whatever the state is paying and $150,000. So I was unaware of that bill. And so now I am, and that's going to be something we were going to want to adjust our budget for. National board certification, they updated our list of national board certified teachers. I was only aware of 14 new teachers. It turns out we have 15 new teachers, and there's a little bit of additional revenue in there. So that's the cause for that. And the transportation is increased by an inflationary factor, and it's always a little bit off from what I expect. So again,
Can
without
I ask a
making,
quick question about
yes,
if we happen to recruit a nationally board certified teacher, would that add to that number immediately, or would we have to wait for the next budget cycle?
it would add to it immediately, but there are 2 times a year when we reconcile that. I think they're going to keep these 2 dates. One will be in May. So in May, I'm going to tell them that I think you've overfunded us. There's 17,000. I think 7,000 of that is an overfunding error. They were expecting a teacher to renew a certificate, and that teacher did not renew. So that'll get caught eventually. So I might as well just, get it caught now. So we sort of true up that in May and then again in August, because kind of wait till August, because although we don't have low performing schools, many districts do, and your compensation is different if you're teaching in a low performing school. So they kind of need to know where those teachers are assigned, and it would be a little presumptuous for us to figure that out in May. So I think they'll kind of, I know they'll true up the funding, I think, in May. If we hired someone over the summer, I really can't, I don't have experience with that yet. I'm not quite sure. It's something for me to figure out, and it is a question I have. Great question. Okay, so let me just stop here. So 562,000 of additional revenue if we made no other changes, expense or revenue wise. So now I thought I would talk about the bad news. That was the good news. Here's the bad news. In January, after we met, the governor introduced his 2 budget bills to the House and to the Senate. Maryland House Bill HB 504 and Senate Bill 429. I'm sure you've read about this in the paper. I'm just going to boil this down for what this means for us. A key element of this is slow rolling certain aspects of the blueprint. And, okay, they've attached dollars to that revision. Specifically, they've said, we're going to not require you, we're going to give you a 4-year hiatus on implementing collaborative planning time, or they call it that, but it's really that split, 40-60 split of planning / teaching. And because of that, we're going to take some money out of your foundation funding. Remember, foundation funding is what we rely on most heavily. And so based on our enrollment at $163 per pupil, that's going to be, if this governor's budget passes as written, that would be a $685,000 hit or decrease to the funding that I just showed you. Because compensatory education and multilingual learner funding is tied directly to foundation, it's expressed as 0.98, 0.85, whatever, of foundation funding, those too will be impacted. So those are two negative impacts as well. For some reason, although the one thing they did do that we appreciate is special ed used to be also expressed as a percentage of the foundation funding. And they are well aware, because we bring this up a lot, that special education is underfunded as it is. So they specifically carved out special ed, and they've rewritten, they're proposing to rewrite the law and express the per pupil amount not as a percentage of the foundation, but as a hard dollar amount. So it's not being impacted. In fact, we might pick up, about $13,000, and that's all related to wealth and percentages, and it's all formula driven. So, but very, very minor impact. Another aspect of legislation, and I can't recall if it's actually in this act or if it's a separate act. I think it is in this act. Is we have in our budget non-public tuition. Really, what that means is for every student we have in a non-public education, so these are special education students that are attending a school outside of Talbot County Public Schools, getting very specialized, individualized instruction. There's a certain amount every year we're told this part's on you, and it hovers around high 30s. I think right now it's just under $39,000. So we pay the first $39,000. After that, it's a cost share. So and it's a 30-70 split, with the state reimbursing us 70% and us having to pay 30% on our own. So the state is proposing to shift that to only reimbursing us 50%. And we would have to pick up 50% on our own. That's a lot of money. I mean, we have a budget of $1.2 million of expense. I think we have about a $660,000 revenue item associated with that. So I'm estimating if we don't, we will continue to look at our cost. And as we get closer it could be that we revise the cost, but I think 1.2 million is about where we need to be. So subject to that not changing, I think it's about a $200,000 decrease in our revenue. And then one other item, and again, this is the one I guess that I really am not sure if it's in this particular budget bill or a different bill. The governor has proposed shifting a pension cost and putting more on the counties and less on the state. And that impact us is about $445,000. So it's quite significant. So all told, if the budget bill were to pass intact, next year alone, we would be looking at an impact of $1.767 million. Then for community schools, while there would not be an impact next year, there would be an impact in outer years. So I just looked 2 years down the road. Basically, what they're saying is if you have any schools that are newly qualified for next year, that's fine. We'll accept those. But we're freezing everything at next year's levels. So the way what that means is no new schools would be identified. I don't think we really have any that are on the cusp of being identified. So that's not probably a huge impact to us. But the bigger issue is that there's no ramp up in per pupil funding for the schools that are getting the per pupil funding, as there should be. And the ones that are newly identified schools will get no per pupil funding in 27 and 28. They wouldn't start getting it until 2029, which is problematic because that's the funding they use to really start rolling out the programming that they've identified in their needs assessments. So
I have a quick question. Compensatory education, backing up, is that IEPs and stuff? I missed that.
Compensatory education is a lot of things. It's anything that's sort of enriching wraparound services. So it could be anything from tutoring. It can be summer school. It can be after school programming. It can be within a school having secondary supports, coaches. We charge instructional assistants there because instructional assistants aren't required, but they're additional hands and minds in the classroom to help aid our students. So,
and tutors as well?
Tutors. Yep. So it's those kind of positions besides the traditional classroom teacher. And frankly, we have some classroom teachers charged to compensatory education just because when I looked at our targets for classroom sizes, there are some schools where our classroom sizes are smaller than that. And so I'm able to justify, well, that's like one more, X grade teacher than we have to have. So I'm going to call that additional support in the building. I mean, it benefits everyone. So I charge it there.
So with the 33 positions that we're trying to get, that will impact that as well, I'm assuming? The 33 new positions?
It would. Yep. So I'm going to continue this thought for a minute, and then I'm going to let Dr. P talk to you for a minute. So this, again, is sort of an 8-year outlook of the impact on our 3 most major programs. With foundation staying at our current enrollment, we would lose about $20.2 million in foundation funding over the next 8 years over what is currently in law. Compensatory education, we would lose $9 million over what is currently in law, and ML, we would lose $2.9 million over what is currently in law. So these are deep cuts that are being proposed. So,
One more question. Are they expecting to put that on the counties, or is that okay?
No, and Ms. Jones did a great job explaining this. What we, the superintendent's group, is advocating for, one thing she's talked about, and that is the ML and our the special ed is held harmless, but compensatory and your ML also to be held harmless, because while this excellence in education bill overall is saving money, it's still not hitting the foundation, and that's the main push, and the advocacy is on. So when I gave you all the recommendations of the blueprint that we feel we can do well, what we're finding successful, there's also a list of recommendations that we have. Case in point, the community schools, by them freezing those per pupil amounts, and those of you that were at the May legislation reception, you heard all of those counties touting the community school impact that they're seeing. So that will take a direct hit. So next steps now, the governor on February 19th will be at the Senate with his bill. So superintendents plan on being there so that we can show solidarity in pushing on, which we call as flat funding, because they're not doing anything to increase that foundation, that base. Because if you were to strip away all of the things, you still don't have enough money just to educate what we have going on now in our schools. And so while some of the items in the blueprint we do like, and the intent is good, but the money, all of the money that we need to do it is not there, really. So those are the next steps for us to continue to talk about that foundation and looking at increasing the money for our foundation. So, and I like these charts because that's what everybody's looking at, the decrease in the funding for the different layers that you can see there, and it's projected all the way out. And while they're saying, even with the collaborative planning, while they're saying it's a freeze until, I think FY30, who's to say what happens between then and FY30? Will something else change? Will additional expenses be added? So it's just a lot baked in to all of this. And like I said, you have all of the things under each pillar, which we are saying we can't do or what we can do. So we're just continuing to advocate that. And yes, so they say, well, you could just go back to the county to make up those expenses. So
That's all well and good if you live in Montgomery County or Prince George's County. That doesn't really help us out here.
I'm curious about the advocacy that's happening at the state level currently. I know you said the superintendents are working against this. Are there any boards of ed who have come together to speak against this, or are there any groups who are really working in this space? And I say this as somebody who has watched the blueprint be created. I've watched since it was the Kirwan Commission, and I think that there are nuances within the blueprint that we can all argue about, and things that smaller details, that maybe take more time to implement. But the overall sort of impact that the blueprint has was a very well studied, very well researched, very well backed, sound educational plan for Maryland. It's never been funded correctly, but I'm just curious where somebody can stand on that and say, well, actually, let's throw that all out. Kind of curious how that stands right now.
I mean, I haven't seen collectively boards. I'm sure there's been meetings. I believe MSEA has placed a stance on the hold harmless and making sure some of those other buckets are that. So I've seen a statement come out from them, but in that I haven't seen any.
I think our board has discussed wanting to take a more larger role in the advocacy space. If we could, as a board, come together and talk about how we could take a stand here, I think that would be good. I think that would be a good first step in that direction. So I think as a board, we back you, superintendent and superintendents, but we will want more discussion on what that looks like. Yeah.
I guess maybe Maeve reach out to them as well and see if they're trying to organize anything.
Well, maybe for sure. I mean, they have a legislative arm and they have, lobbyists, and they're working in this space. But I'm kind of wondering if our individual representation might want to hear from us, and if the governor would even entertain a letter from, a local board of education. The few times that I have had FaceTime with the governor, he seems completely unaware of the challenges that we face here in Talbot County, and so I take my minute when I get it to be like, hi, here's all the problems that we need to know about here. But I think more is more when it comes to knowledge and understanding of like what happens on the ground. Even if we could, previous governors have been here, have walked our schools, if we could invite the governor here and just be like, hey, this is a terrible idea, this is why, can you see it firsthand? I think we'd all support that.
And I think in support of that, also showing our data and how we tell our personal story would also be supportive here, because we can look at this as education as a business, and we can look at all the numbers and kind of drill down. But we need to actually show how our outcomes of our students have improved just by the implementation of the current curriculum that you've tried to implement and where that is going, and how it's actually sliding up the scale. And I think those stories need to be told.
I think early on, I guess it was probably my first year, I reached out to the governor's office to try to get the invite for him to come, but I had his education lead person, and we talked for a little bit. But I do think that's a good idea. I'll continue to try to get him to come over.
Have we heard anything from the state superintendent of schools on this?
Yeah, certainly. Dr. Wright met with all of the superintendents to first tell us about this excellence in education bill. And Dr. Michael has come over toward the schools, president of the State Board of Education. So they are, they're well aware of this bill. And so we voiced our concerns to them as well.
What happens if we don't fund all their things that they're asking us to do? What happens if we don't do all the things that Blueprint's telling us to do? Without the money.
Well, I was on a call today with the AIB, and we've recently launched a dashboard. It's about 18 months late from when they needed to have it launched, but it's launched now. And it's a way for the public and for anybody interested to go in and look and see how we're doing meeting the mandates of 75% of the money following the students to the schools for each program. So there's, just been a lot of kinks to develop that and get it. And the data looks pretty good. I looked at a reconciliation of that today. Our data looks pretty good now. It didn't a month ago, but it looks better now. And so this is sort of our baseline year, and their expectation is that wherever we are non-compliant, which we're not compliant in every program, in every school, for every funding source, we're just not. But there's not a district in the state that is, or really could be. Some are further out of whack than others. And so we have to be, quote unquote, 50% better next year. No one's defined what 50% means. Is it hard dollars? Is it number of schools? No one's defined what better means. So that's a work in process. We don't know. And then also they're working on a process right now for developing a waiver. And so they solicited input from all the school districts, and also I think that they're going to get other feedback about why should we allow you to not meet that 50% target. And I think many of us provided feedback as to why it could be a challenge in certain programs, in certain size districts for certain reasons. So we've given them that feedback, and they're going to continue to work on that. So I don't know. I mean, that's just what the law is. So you asked, what if we don't comply? As of right now, the what if is in FY26 by December of this, December of 2025, fiscal year 26, we have to report where we are in terms of meeting those goals. And if we're not 50%, if we're not better, then they have to give us a warning, and there's a process, and then they could potentially withhold some funding. So, but it's not going to just, huh? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So,
I mean, first of all, calling it excellence in education bill is hysterical. But do we want to get people in the community to write letters about this at this point? I mean, they're chopping our funding majorly. I mean, it seems like people in the community should also speak up if they're so inclined.
maybe that's something to run by Mary Pat at PASAM. So sort of the group taking the lead is PASAM, which is, I don't know, State Superintendent Association. I don't know what the P stands for. Their lobbyist, and then MABE's lobbyist, in-house and external. They're all working on this. So I'd be interested to see like what their recommendation would be. Is it time to write letters now, or 2 weeks from now, or 4 weeks? I don't know.
Do you know, I haven't been following super closely. What's the appetite for this in are people receiving this well, or is there a lot of discussion? Or it seems like the knee-jerk reaction that I have read is, yeah, no, we won't be doing that. But I haven't really seen anybody to stand up to say that they won't be passing the governor's budget. I'm not sure the precedent for that, what it looks like, or if there's any talk about it happening.
Well, I think it all started with our letter to the governor back in November when we decided to say, hey, we've really tried this blueprint. Some things are working well, but these things just aren't. And that was the starting point of the creation of this bill. I think a way to say, okay, we heard you. We'll take some things off the plate. Let's start with collaborative planning, right?
But the things they took off the plate don't actually cost any money.
Right, right.
That's not,
and I think it's like
they
we'll do this over
but
here.
I mean, not that kind of money.
But it's also unintended things on the other end. So while it started the conversation, and I think for legislators, it's for a lot of them, they're just learning too, like, oh, what's really happening, and really trying to find out the cost of things and really hearing from districts. So I think that kind of like got the wheels turning for everyone.
I thought we would move next to just other thoughts on not so much about the proposed legislation, and that's what it is right now. It's proposed legislation. We don't have a sense of how likely it is to pass. Is it going to pass intact? Is it going to pass with modifications and amendments? We don't know. So I thought we would go into other specific thoughts, comments, concerns. I went ahead and proposed what staff thought would be good edits to make to the January draft for Wednesday night. So my recommendation is to add in those first two lines is that 562,000, I think, of additional revenue that came in our state aid calculation. So my recommendation is we would include that. That is based on current COMAR. So if the governor's budget doesn't pass or whatever, this is what we are entitled to under current law. Because a big portion of this is $237,082 of additional community school revenue, we would need to increase our expenses in those programs by the same amount. So I think if we recognize the revenue, we need to also put the offsetting expense in the budget. And again, I'm working with the two community school coordinators on exactly where that revenue needs to flow into our budget. And then my other suggestion is to keep everything flat. I mean, this is, I don't want to say a bonus to us, but it's additional funding. So we could reduce our ask to the county council by that amount of money. So that would net to our revenues would go up by 237,000. Our expenses would go up 237,000. This is where we had the budget in January. This is where our unrestricted budget would be at the after that adjustment. Does everyone sort of understand what I'm proposing? I can show you, or what I'm not proposing it. It's an idea. This is basically taking all those changes and flowing them through in this first column. This is what the draft looked like in January with an $85.8 million unrestricted price tag, and now it would be $86 million. This is what I was trying to show you in the public budget hearing before that I didn't do well. This is, I think, the first time you're seeing this. This is the breakout between what we're asking from the county and what the state is going to be providing. And so these are the totals. The only thing out of this $61.7 million that wouldn't be coming from the county council is the number right above it, the $1 million, 50,000 estimate, primarily of interest income. That obviously comes from the bank and the financial institutions we work with. Other than that, so that means it's about $60.7 million that we would be getting from the county council in our request. We would be contributing around $800,000 from our fund balance, and that would provide total funding outside of state funding of $62.5 million plus what the state is giving us, and that gets us to our $86 million. If you want to see that same thing sort of instead compared to the FY25, if you'd like to see that compared to FY25 instead of what I proposed last month, this is what this would look like. So again, in FY25, our unrestricted budget was $77.1 million, and we were looking at an $86 million budget for next year. So it's an increase of $8.9 million. Unrestricted, and then a decrease of $5.3 million. This kind of puts it all the pieces together again. This is that same slide from earlier. $8.9 million in unrestricted increase, a $5.3 million increase in our grant funding. It nets to a $3.6 million budget increase, which is a 3.9% increase. So, I mean, it's not a crazy increase. It's heavy increase to the county, but in terms of how we're operating, it's not a significant increase.
Have we seen our budget increase by about that percent over the past few years? Maybe take the COVID years.
Did you
out,
bring
which
that
are
cheat
weird.
sheet? Funny, you should ask that. Dr. P wanted me to pull that together for her today. I don't really have it broken out that way. What she and I were talking through were just solely focused on the revenue that we've asked for the county. So it hasn't been our total budget. In terms of what we've asked from the county, we've seen a lot of FY23, that was a 7% increase. FY24, it was an 8.5% increase. FY25, it was a 7% increase. And what we're talking to right with this, make sure I'm looking at the right number, 60. Let me go back one slide. I'm not sure I have this exactly right, but it's about an 11.5% increase, maybe 11, somewhere in the 11% increase, I think. So it is higher than what we've asked before. Go ahead.
Can you explain the difference between what you're explaining about what is a 3.6% increase and what's the 11.5% increase?
The 11.5% increase is strictly carving out, looking at one column. So just looking at this money right here, what we're getting from the county council. Yeah. So it's excluding what we get from the state, and it's excluding the revenue that we earn on interest income and from other sources. So that's kind of a look at the increase in the revenue request to the county council. And so when I say it's a 3.9% increase or 3.6 million, what I'm saying is we're factoring in everything. We're looking more at it from the expense side. So it includes everything. And it also includes all the positions and work we do with the help of government grant funding too. And so we get 9.8, we're expecting to get $9.8 million in grant funding next year.
I'm assuming these grants aren't being impacted by the new legislation going with the grant cuts and whatnot.
So that was a big hold our breath moment for about a week. Every day we would get a little update or a little sliver of information. But so far, they started carving out more and more and more. We get money from Medicaid. We get money. It essentially, yes, we feel like these programs that we're participating in none of them are from U.S. Department of Education. They're from, that's not true, but yeah, the title programs are from U.S. Department of Education, actually. But as of right now, for this year, when they did the spending freeze the other week, all of that money was saved. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know for next year. It could change for sure.
I'm not sure how to ask this question, but before Blueprint, things were requested in terms of maintenance of effort. And where would this fall in regards to that? Or is that even possible to state?
I haven't done that calculation yet for the FY26 year. I have to get it done in the next couple of weeks, but I did do a preliminary look at it. We are in the state of Maryland a couple of years ago. The dynamics have changed. I would say roughly half, maybe now more than half of the counties are using maintenance of effort as their funding. We are not. We get local share. The reason for that is the counties that were previously more richly funded per pupil, they have become maintenance of effort because we have historically received less per pupil. We are not at the maintenance. So the funding mechanism now is you go through all these different funding formulas, you fall into these parameters times an enrollment number or average enrollment equals X amount of dollars, add them all up. You compare that for each program or you compare it overall to what maintenance of effort would have been, and you take the higher number. So for us, the formula works so that it's higher, but those numbers are closing. The gap is closing. I don't know if we're ever going to get to a point where maintenance of effort becomes the rule, or if or not. I don't know. But for now, we're not there. So
am I understanding what you're saying is that we are not yet on maintenance of effort because it is deemed that we are not yet at the level of effort and per pupil spending that would be expected, or would lead us to be at a point where then the measure was maintenance of effort thereafter?
It's an annual calculation, so potentially you could slip in and out of maintenance of effort, but it's always a dual calculation. And so how the maintenance of effort calculation works is you look at your funding from the prior year. So let me get to that slide. We would add up in the FY25 column all of this funding from the 37 million down to the 2 point. Nope. This is combined. This is combined into one column, but it's not broken out like FY26 is between local and state. But the piece that is just local for FY25, we would add up all of these programs and divide it by the number of students that we count in our student count back in the fall on September 30. You divide that by, and that gives you a per pupil amount. And then you take that and multiply it. Let me think about it. Actually, you divide it by the prior, you divide it by the prior year student count. You come up with the per pupil amount, and then you multiply it by the more recent student count. So the count we just did in this current fiscal year. And that's how you come up with your maintenance of effort calculation. And you compare that to all these individual formulas. And whichever sum is greater is how you are funded. So we're just not at the point where the formulas obviously are generating more revenue. If the so a county like Worcester, where they have historically given millions and millions and millions over what they've been required to give under formula, that becomes self-fulfilling or maintenance of effort. They don't get to back away. They don't get to say the next year, you know what, we don't feel like doing that, or we don't have the resources. It kind of keeps the concept behind my maintenance of effort is to provide some predictability for the counties. And so if a county's finances were to take a turn for the worse, the schools aren't going to be the first impacted. So it was kind of a protection, I guess, is how I look at it for the schools. For us, because we didn't have a large amount historically funded over what they had to fund us, it just, the way the formulas work out, it doesn't come into play for us anymore, or it has not yet come into play for us, is how I should say it.
And then with this budget and the modifications that you were suggesting that were from the information that you got from the state based on the formula and the laws that currently exist. And so then do we ask, then what happens? So if it changes process wise, then what happens? When does that happen, and how does all of that?
Sure. Well, this
work?
is uncharted territory. I mean, for me, I don't know. I can't speak back, many years. So what typically happens in a budget process is we pass a budget in February, we submit it to the county council, we go to the county council and explain the budget to them so that they have an understanding of what our needs are. They go through work sessions, deliberation. Typically, we go back a time or two to clear up questions, respond to, inquiries that they have. And then they draft their budget for all of their departments, including Talbot County Public Schools. And we get a letter based on the budget they draft, and they say, here's how much we're putting in the budget for you for your operating budget and for your capital needs. And based on that, that's the budget they're proposing. They have a waiting period. They have a public budget hearing, and ultimately they don't adjust their budget, and they finalize it, and we get a final appropriation. So there's a time in between when they introduce their budget and when they vote on it. There's a public budget hearing, they're open to input. So that's when a lot of times, we'll have people go to that public budget hearing. Mr. Andy right behind me will, come, we rally the troops if we need to, and we show where we are and we have please support. And, parents will get up and speak about things that are near and dear to their hearts. So that's the process. And when we get the letter from the county council, typically it's not everything we ask for. So then we have to figure out and make some very hard decisions as to, all right, where, how is that going to work for us? Can we raise some additional revenue? Where can we trim? So I think the reason my recommendation is just to base this on current laws, we just really don't know. I feel like there is a lot of advocacy going on, not in support or supporting amendments to what's being proposed. I just feel like there's way too many unknowns at this point to try to move forward with guessing how that's going to ultimately end up. I think we can only deal with what we know. So if and when the governor's budget passes and we get our appropriation letter from the county, then we'll know what we're dealing with and we'll have to make some changes. So I predict a more active May and early June budget discussion and budget work than we've typically had to do. We typically vote in May or sometimes at the June board meeting on finalization to our budget. We may have to have a work session or two in there too.
So somewhere in that process, as the county council is evaluating our budget and having their hearings and considering that, somewhere along in there, we hope that we will be able to know what the governor's final budget is, right?
Right. I think they go out of count. What's their last day? It's April, I think. Signed Diaz like April
10th or so.
Yeah, so we'll definitely know something by then. It might extend a little beyond then, because once it gets put into law, he gives very big round, dollar amounts, and then MSDE has to get a hold of that and then kind of carve it out between the counties and make sure everything's being implemented with fidelity according to, how the law reads. So I think, I don't know if it'll be in time for our April. I probably won't be in time for our April meeting, to be honest. It probably is going to be a lot of May work. And I'm going to Italy in May for 10 days. I'm just throwing that out there. So you are welcome to come. So
I say that out loud.
the capital slide in here as well. The capital side, I can go back to it. But again, it was basically the money for just the chapel project and the lights at the stadium at St. Michael's Middle High. So, we're not voting tonight. I guess I'm looking for thoughts from the board about if you're comfortable with sort of adjusting the budget that we proposed in January in this way. If you have other thoughts, request.
I think this is the information we have to go with now. So personally, I'm in favor of the change.
I agree, and I think that what you said is important. Let's go with what we know, and our budget that we've put together is what we know that we need for this year, and these changes are what you currently know, and so let's stick with that right now, and if and when we have to look at it differently, we will do that. Does anybody else want to speak on this? We're not voting on this, we're just talking right now.
I agree.
Yeah, I agree. I think that makes sense. We don't have anything else that's concrete that we could base this on at this point. So I think it makes sense to go with that.
Okay, I'm planning to do a really abbreviated budget. Maybe just sort of since we've been through this a lot, and I will do whatever the board wants, but I feel like maybe we just do kind of summarize where our revenues are, where our expenses are after these adjustments, what the capital budget is, and just kind of call it a day for Wednesday night. Is that good? Does that meet everyone's needs? Okay.
All right, good evening, members of the board. So next we're going to be talking about school safety, and I do have a guest joining us, so I'm going to wait for him to come on to proceed, okay? All right. John, are you there? Can you hear me? Very good. John, thank you very much for being patient with us through that budget talk. He was watching online as well. So this evening, John and I will be talking about a school safety system. John represents Centegix. He's a regional vice president for that company, and they provide a technology-based school safety platform. So before turning it over to John for his presentation, I just wanted to briefly share with the board how we've arrived to this point. And so basically, our school safety team is always looking for ways to improve the safety of our schools for our students and staff. And we are in constant collaboration with the Talbot County Sheriff's Office. And through discussions with them, we were looking at and kind of came to a point where we wanted to look at vendors who offered wearable solutions for school safety. And John will talk a lot about their product. But at that time, I pulled together a focus group that included members from the Sheriff's Department, school administration, the Talbot County Emergency Management, and of course our school safety staff. And we reviewed a few different products. And John with Centegix did a great job, and the focus group recommended their product to move forward with. And this is just a discussion at this point, and we're going through the budget process, and John is aware of that. But I realized that we're a little out of sorts in the sense that this is the first time we're talking to the board about it. But it was kind of a situation where I wanted to make sure that we had the conversations with the the safety professionals first, and then bring the best option to the board, and not kind of muddy the waters going through a bunch of different products. So at that point, or at this point, I'm going to turn it over to John, and he's going to share his screen and go through a presentation. So John, it's all you. Yeah, you sound great, John. Yep, it looks good.
currently to identify that there's an issue, to notify the people that need to understand, and to get to the people that are responding and providing the help. Okay, so time is the most critical factor. And our safety platform is designed just to do that, is to decrease the time or compress the time it takes to actually identify, notify, and respond. So what you're looking at now is kind of what's front and center with our safety platform. It's called Crisis Alert. It is our wearable badge, right? So typically, when we implement Crisis Alert, right, every staff member is getting a badge, right? We're protecting everyone. There's complete equity with who is actually getting the badge. One of the other things that's really important to know about the system in general, and this question comes up often, is that it's not dependent on cellular service, and it's not dependent on your Wi-Fi service. And that's really important. Think about your school districts and your buildings in general, and how well your cell phones can work in any one of those given buildings. So we knew when we set out to create this platform that we were going to have to come up with a system that was not dependent on cell phone service, and Wi-Fi service. This is a complete independent network that's set up within each one of your buildings, and we can talk about that a little further as well. So a couple of things about Crisis Alert, and I want to reemphasize that our safety platform is the foundation. There's three main components: Crisis Alert, where we're going to spend our time today; Safety Blueprint, which hand in hand with Crisis Alert, it is the digital maps of your buildings, and they serve as the foundation of our alerts when somebody actually presses the button for help on their badge. And then Visitor Management is the third component. We'll talk a little bit about that towards the end. So a couple very high-level important things to know about Crisis Alert. Number one, it's one-button activation, right? It couldn't be a simpler solution for a staff member to get help when they need help. It also is total campus coverage. So it doesn't only work just within your buildings, but it also works on your full campus, on your soccer fields, in your parking lots, okay, on your baseball fields. So it's full campus coverage. The location information is probably one of the most important parts of our system, and that is coming from the blueprint, the digital maps, and then the alerts when the button is pressed. So we can pinpoint not only who needs the help, but exactly where they are down to the classroom location in any one of your buildings. And outside of stressing how important it is the fact that we're not reliant on cell phone service to make this platform work, right? Is that we have multiple modalities of notifying people when there is a crisis, more specifically in a situation where there's a lockdown. So integral to our platform is when we implement it, we also install strobes, the visual indicator, right, that there is an incident, as well as audio. We have the ability to tap in and integrate to your intercom systems and your bells and pagers systems, right? So we're giving that not only that visual cueing that a school is going into a lockdown, but also that auditory cueing. But I couldn't stress enough how important that is around having those visual cues as part of the overall system. I'm going to pause there just to see if anybody does have questions. Okay. So I want to share this story. It's one story of many. It's actually in one of our larger districts down in Florida. We had, it was within a high school, Avon Park High School. We had an assistant principal that was doing an evaluation in a classroom in this high school one day. And one of the students in the back yelled out that her classmate had passed out. She was really upset. No one knew what was going on. And we had the assistant principal go immediately to the back. She went to the back to see what was going on, and she could identify pretty quickly that she was having some type of cardiac issue. So she pressed her button. when you press your button, and we'll talk about the mechanics of how it works, the alert goes out to your local response team, the people in your building that you designate as the folks that are going to respond when somebody presses an alert and actually needs help. Okay. Well, help came very quickly, and luckily their local response team included a nurse. So the nurse was able to start providing CPR immediately, which bought them some time, as they called the paramedics. That girl made a full recovery, but all of this happens within seconds, right? When the badge is pressed, that alert goes out in seconds, and the response team gets that alert in seconds. So it's very quick. Coming back to compressing time, right? Identifying, notifying, and responding, and just really reducing the time it takes to actually implement those processes. One of the things we really believe in is just getting feedback, right, from our partner districts when we implement Crisis Alert. So quite often we will do surveys, and we will get a sense of how things are going within the district with the system. This is one of the most recent surveys and compiled survey data, but I'll have you look at the last two bullets and the last two questions. Was it easy to use Crisis Alert badge? 99% of the people said yes. And I'll remind you, think of the concept. It's as simple as pressing a button on the badge that you're wearing on your lanyard. Does having it to help you feel safer and more supported as a staff member? 97 people said yes that responded, right? So it's about empowering your staff to make them feel safe in your school buildings and giving them a way to call for help, not just for themselves when they need help, but to help other people, right? To help other staff members when something critical is in play and is happening. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the modes of use, because there's really two types of alerts, right? It's a single badge, but it's used in two main, let's call it, buckets of incidents. Number one is a staff alert, right? That's about 99% of the times that the system is being used week in and week out. And then there's the lockdown alerts, right? So we'll talk about the difference. So for a staff alert, well, what are we talking about? Typically, it's when somebody is having a medical emergency, or students are getting into an altercation, or you're with a class and one of the students runs away and you can't leave your class, right? Student elopement. Basically, any type of situation where a staff member, right, is going to need help because they can't handle that situation on their own and they need help immediately. So what's happening is the button's being pressed 3 consecutive times. I need help. I just pressed my button or my badge. And what happens is the badge vibrates, right? So it tells the wearer that I've successfully sent the alert to the response team. All right. So this is a staff alert. Now, what is the response team getting? What does the alert look like? Well, the foundation of the alert that you can see here on the screen, right, is a digital map of your school building, right, where they are and where they're working. I'm going to blow this up a little bit. Well, I can see, now keep in mind, let's say there's 4 or 5 people on the response team. They all get this alert at the same time. It comes up on their phone and it comes up on their computer screen at the same time. All right, so the whole response team is receiving the exact alert. They can see through the blinking red dot who it is that pressed their badge, right? Exactly who it is. In this case, it's Rob Kent. And it shows you exactly where this person is in your building or out on a soccer field or the parking lot, right? So the response team knows exactly who it is and where they are. Now, the other thing I wanted to point out is you see some of the icons on the actual map, right? These are your safety assets. So this is the second component of the platform, Safety Blueprint, right? It's the digital map of your building. What we do with those maps, once we render them into our system, is we map your safety assets, your AED kits, your Stop the Bleed kits, where all your safety cameras are, in case something's happening in a certain area and you can actually see where that closest camera is. You can then have somebody turn on the camera if you need them greater visibility into the situation. But the point here is that, these safety assets don't sit on a paper map somewhere where somebody has to use more time to go dig them out. It's all at the response team's fingertips. So they have access to, and they know exactly where all these safety assets are in case they have to access them to provide help to the person that actually pressed their badge and needs the help. Okay. So that's that's the first mode of use. The second mode of use is what we'll call a campus-wide alert or a lockdown alert. All right. So it's the same process, but there's some very different things that are happening. So keep in mind, you've got your staff members are empowered to use this for the day-to-day things, but they're also empowered to use crisis alert if, God forbid, an intruder was on campus or you saw somebody with a weapon trying to get into the building. Now you've got the force multiplier, right? You've got the eyes and ears of your full staff. And when we implement this, understand that everyone gets the badge. It's not just your educators and your administrators. It's your coaches. It's your substitute teachers. Everyone has the badge. So they're empowered to inform and identify when there is a critical situation and respond. So what happens differently with a campus-wide lockdown alert, right, is that you're not pressing the button 3 times, you're pressing it 8 times. So it's very intentional. I'm going to go to the next slide so you can see what's happening different with a lockdown alert. Well, there's some very different things happening. Number one, you'll notice we talked about the strobes that we install as part of the implementation. The strobes get installed in every classroom, throughout the hallways, throughout the cafeterias, in your gymnasiums, right? This is your visual cueing. So what we tell folks in training, right, is that press the button 8 times if you're putting the building in lockdown mode, or just keep pressing it until you see and hear the cueing. The strobes going off, right? The integrated message that's coming on through your intercom system, right? That's completely customizable. What also happens differently is that all of the computers in the building are locked down, and they have an aligned message to what the staff is hearing and everyone's hearing in the building that's coming on through the intercom system. Okay, so everyone has to stop working, and according to your security protocols, you would be going to the place you need to be for a lockdown. And then the last thing that happens differently is with the first type of alert, your local response team gets that alert. That happens as well with a campus-wide lockdown. But what also happens at the same time is that same alert at the same time can be programmed to be sent to your local authorities, 911 or your local PSAP. So there's no loss in time in getting to phones or calling 911 and getting in the queue. This all happens immediately when your local response team receives that alert on their phones and on their computer screens. It can also be sent to 911. Right? So a few things that I would punctuate, I can't say enough about how important the visual cueing integrated strobes is, right? We had a really unfortunate situation in Georgia back in September. We had an active shooter situation with one of our partner districts. Several people did lose their lives, but there is a story that came out of that. The actual educator that used her button to lock down that building, who saw the intruder in the building, right? Now, she didn't know. At first, she heard banging, right, which was actual gunfire going off in the building. But a lot of folks who aren't familiar with what gunfire sounds like can be mistaken for a number of things. It can sound like banging on lockers, right? But here's where the strobe really came in and saved lives. It provided, so that teacher didn't go outside, right, to see what was going on, right? It provided that visual cueing that this wasn't a drill. That building was going in lockdown. So she knew not to open up that door, and she knew to get her to a safe place. So again, just reemphasizing the importance of not only the integrated message that can come on through your intercom system, but the strobes as well.
Lockdown, lockdown. Lock the doors. Stay away from the windows. Encerrarse, encerrarse. Cierren las puertas con llave. Manténganse lejos de las ventanas.
So this is the actual computer lockdown message. And again, this can be completely customizable in terms of what you need the instructions to say. And they can align with what you're also hearing through the intercom systems. The other part, and this kind of closes out the process that's really important and valuable, is the data capture piece. So anytime the badge is used to issue an alert, the response team actually has to close out the alert, right? So there's an administrator app that only the response team gets in the building, and somebody on that response team, it's a very simple series of drop-down menus, and you just pick what the nature of that incident was. And what happens is we compile all of the data for all of the alerts that have been closed out. So now you can start to look from superintendent, from your perspective, you can look across your whole district, right? You can look at all your buildings and where incidents are occurring, but more specifically, what type of incidents and where are they occurring in your building, right? So you actually start to compile this information in our data dashboard, and you can use this data to make decisions about resource allocation. Where might we need more resources? Where might we be able to pull back resources because there's not really a whole lot of alerts going on? The type of and tracking the type of incidents that are happening throughout your school district. Excuse me. We also have some districts that use the data capture piece for tracking de-escalated events. So the categories in the data dashboard are customizable. So you can actually create. It comes with a set of pre-programmed categories, but you can customize categories for yourself. So if you wanted to track situations where you were able to de-escalate a situation before it turned into something more serious, like a student altercation, you can use that as well for creating those custom fields and capturing the data. And then the last component I just want to touch on, it's the third component of our safety platform, is our visitor management system. So, it helps you manage the flow of your visitors and your volunteers, as well as your students, if you want to use it in that manner. And it's a system that can be either self-operated as a self-serve kiosk, where you're using this scanner that's a part of our system to scan your badge, does background checks, it does sex offender checks, it does custody checks of the person that's checking into your building. And then it also has an alert system. So for some reason, if they're on a no-go list or they have been on a sex offender register, an alert will go to somebody that's been designated as an administrator in that local building, right? And it'll prevent them from going in. Or if it's permitting them to go into your building, then what it does is takes a live picture of them and prints out the sticky badge that they can wear while they're spending time within the building. Another feature that we have that's of really high value is, I'll hold up the badge here. This is a similar badge, but it's a little different and it's unique to our visitor management system. It's called Enhanced Visitor Management. And if you implement Crisis Alert, the white badge, right, the alert system, you can use Enhanced Visitor Management for assigning people badges, right, when they come into the building, so you can actually track them in real time. And once they check out and turn in their badge, you can actually see where they've been in your building. So if there's ever a question that comes up with an incident a week later or 2 weeks later, you can actually go back and see, well, who did we have in our buildings and where were they? So unlike the Crisis Alert badge, the white badge, this is only active when somebody presses the button. So a lot of times people ask, well, geez, is that tracking my staff members? No, it's not. It's only active when somebody presses the button. Unlike the white badge, unlike Crisis Alert, the yellow badge, when you assign it to somebody, it's on all the time, right? It's tracking the people that you're managing that are coming in and out of your buildings. We even have a a lot of our districts will use it to track contractors, right? So they can actually see when they've entered the building, where they've been in the buildings, and when they're actually checking back out of the buildings. So in closing this out, and we'll open it up for questions, again, here's just some more specific districts that we work with. We have a tremendous presence across the United States, depending on which states, right? So when you look on the East Coast, in the state of Georgia, we have close to 85% of the districts in Georgia that have implemented Crisis Alert. In Florida, we have 50% of the districts that have implemented Crisis Alert. We have Aldine, Texas, just a lot of bigger, notable districts. And with that, I'm going to pause here and just open it up to questions that you might have.
I always have questions. Are the strobe and will they be outside at a ball field?
Gosh, I'm sorry. I'm having real difficulty hearing. Can you repeat
John,
that?
The question was, would the strobes be on the exterior of the building, or is it just an interior?
Most of them will be on the interior of the building. Some can be on the exterior. The typical implementation is, again, and note about the strobes. The strobes are dual function. They are locating beacons, but they're also strobes. So when the building goes in lockdown, they're blinking red, or they're blinking a different color that might align with it. Maybe the building's not going into a lockdown, but it's going into a shelter in place. So those are customizable in terms of the colors of the strobes, but they act as a locating beacon as well. In other words, when somebody presses their badge, that's the device that's actually pinpointing and picking up the signal of where they are. For the outside of the campus, right, we install locating beacons that are not strobes, and that's how we get full campus coverage on your football fields and your parking lots, so on and so forth.
I know, sorry, I have 4 questions. I'll run through them. So with the strobe light, I know that some strobes can affect kids and make them more agitated. Is that anything that we really need to worry about, or makes that much of a difference?
I've never had that brought up as it being a detriment to children. What we find, and we'll take it back a bit. Our system didn't always include strobes, right? When we first got started off, it was the badge, it was the locating beacons. But when Parkland happened back in 2018 on Valentine's Day, one of the real valuable lessons we learned was we needed better ways and more multi-modality ways of notifying people that the building's going in lockdown, right? Not just a message coming on, right? Not just responders coming, but we needed visual cues, and that's why we developed the strobes as an additional way to notify that there is a crisis and that the building is going into lockdown.
So that benefit outweighs the risk to the student, more or less, is what you're getting at.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. Can you repeat that?
John, one of the board members just said that the benefit outweighs the risk, basically. But also, I just to say that most of our buildings already have strobes associated with the fire alarm system. So if there are issues with students, they're dealt with individually.
The alerts, will those go out to the students and the parents, or is that something we regulate?
There's like an echo, so it's very difficult to hear. I'm sorry. I heard something about students and parents, but I couldn't make out the full question.
And I apologize, Ms. Wheelan-Jarrett. Do you mind just repeating that one for me too?
Sure. This is probably more for Mr. Schaefer than it is you anyway. So my question is do those alerts go out to the parents and the students all at the same time, or is that something we can regulate?
No, that would just be for the assigned staff members to receive the notifications. Now, there would be for a lockdown or something like that, or a school-wide notification. As John showed, there would be a school-wide notification on computers and the PA systems, and that wouldn't change. Yeah.
My last question is, there's always going to be a parent or somebody in the public that says you're violating my rights with these tags following me around the school. How are we going to handle that?
So, John, the question was what you addressed about the tags following staff or staff around the
More
school.
so visitors.
Yeah. And I would say that that's probably number one. The staff badges are not following. It's just one activation. The visitors, yeah, I'm sorry, but if you're going to the school, I guess that's just a consequence of of signing in and going through that process.
I have a question. So you said the response team is made up of people in the building. Is that correct?
Yeah, and it can look like any number of configurations of who is on the response team, but typically it's a principal, it's a nurse, it's an SRO if you have SROs, somebody with a walkie-talkie. But it can look different from building to building.
I have a comment about that. I know they get buzzed many times a day. Admin, come here. I don't know how that would work in an emergency situation, because I feel like the admin they're already buzzed many times a day. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
It was just a thought that I had. I was confused. How are they? So these people are in the school working, but they're also response people, like a nurse.
And John, I'm sorry. I was just going to answer that one real quick. So I think that the most important thing to kind of take away from that is that there would be an aspect of staff training on what these badges would be used for, what the appropriate use is, and so that's a huge piece, a communication piece to staff and implementing a system like this. So, for the standard student, there's a process in place in schools for like the student that's late to class or something like that. That would not warrant a system like this if we were to go to it. This is more for a serious nature, as John said, kind of an altercation, a fight, something like that, medical emergency. Those are things that we're targeting with a system like this.
Yeah, I would add to that. I mean, I could make out most of your response, Kevin. I would add to that is part of that comes down to policy and policy making, right? What is this actually going to be used for? What is it not going to be used for, right? And that can come out and be delivered as part of the training. So folks understand, what's appropriate use of the badge and what's not.
I had a follow-up question about the tracking. Is there some kind of off switch on an educator or a teacher's badge, or can I use this at home if I have a medical event? Do I, if I push 3 times, will the EMTs come to my house? And I am concerned about privacy for our staff and the overall sense that they're being tracked. Can you speak to how that all works?
The tracking?
Yeah. First,
okay.
Does it track outside of the building? And second, I'd be curious with visitors as well, how many subpoenas you get for that information. Because when you start collecting all this data on people, you have all this data on people. It just seems like a tricky space to operate in.
Yeah, so let me address the crisis alert badge first, right? I wouldn't even use the word tracking, right? This isn't active unless somebody presses the button, right? And now we know who needs the help, right? And that alert needs to be shut off. When this button's not being pressed, this has no way of tracking anybody, right? It's not, in essence, it's not on, right? It has to be activated by pressing the button. For visitor management, for the yellow badge, this is on as soon as it's activated and you assign it to somebody that's in your building. So it is tracking them, but it's intentional. You want to know where they are, right? And it doesn't have to be used for everybody, right? It's a visitor coming in. You might only want to use this for certain visitors or volunteers that are coming into your buildings, and others they're only actually checking in and then getting their sticky badge, identifying who they are in the building.
I do have a question for the background checks. Is it they put their license in? Is that how you check back?
For visitor management, the scanner that comes with this system scans either a passport or their license, and it's connected to a local and national sex offender database, right? So that gets refreshed, I believe, daily, updated daily. And that's how it can check against that national local database. And that's basically how it works on the back end.
So to follow up on my question, if I'm an educator and I leave my building and I go pick up my kid at baseball practice, not on the school grounds, and some kid has a medical emergency, can I then push my badge then?
No, you wouldn't be able to. It's going to be network specific. So within that building, it's just a local network that's going to, it's going to encompass our campuses. And once you're outside that, and then that badge would not be effective. Correct, John? Am I right on that?
I'm sorry. It was really hard
yeah,
to do.
Yeah, we're good, John. I was just I was getting a double check, but I'm pretty confident that is correct, because that's what the whole network that they would be installing is meant to do.
In a small district like ours, I'm curious how many times per day, if you have any data on how many times per day this is used, or maybe is it more per week?
Yeah, we have data on that. On average per week, it's a badge is being pressed 8 times, but that can vary between the size of the district, the size of the building. And again, we're not talking about lockdown, right? A lockdown, it's a very rare instance that the badge would be used for a lockdown situation, and that's a good thing. We're talking about the day-to-day instances, right? Medical, fights, medical issues, cardiac issues, things like that, where somebody is going to need help.
I would assume there's a ramp in or like a learning curve during which you would have some false alarms or just incorrect usage. But I would also assume that sort of levels out once people get used to it being around. Is that a correct assumption?
Yeah. In the past, there has been false alarms, or it was a training issue, right? They didn't know what to do, so they pressed their badge 8 times. The building went into lockdown. That has happened very, very few times. It's intentional, right? That you actually have to press the button 8 times for a lockdown situation, right? Doesn't typically happen by mistake.
And so just jumping back to the background check question, we currently do that now. So we have a system in place. This would just be updating the current system, but any visitor that comes into the school building that's going on a field trip or whatever is required to provide their license and go through that check-in process.
Yeah. Again, I couldn't really hear.
No, John, you're good. I was just explaining the background check that we currently do.
Okay.
So what happens if the network goes down? So right now people are used to using a cell phone system or the phone system, and now they're going to be relying on the device. So what happens if the network goes down?
So as part of the system, we have a wireless backup. So if the network goes down, the system's still up and running. The other thing we didn't talk about is the implementation of the system, the major components. So there's the badge when we're talking about crisis alert. There's the strobes. There's the locating beacons, kind of what the strobe acts as well. The locating beacons. Those are the main components. And then there's one device called a gateway, right, that picks up the signals from the strobes and locating beacons and sends out the signal to the internet. That's how the signal would get out to local authorities. All of the devices, right, the badges, the strobes, the locating beacons, they're all battery operated, right? So they're not hardwired, and that's really important. They're multi-year batteries. And I mentioned in the beginning that we're hardware and software as a service. So we monitor the health of all of your devices when we implement this, right? So we have a command center that can see the badge health, the device health, i.e. the battery life. But coming back to your original question, yes, we do have battery backup and network backup as part of the system. So it's reliable, right? It's not going to go down.
So we haven't talked about cost, which is obviously important, but I would be curious. I'm not going to ask that. That's not my question. I'm curious, how often do you need to replace components after the initial lift of whatever the cost is? Are we looking at doing a whole system overhaul every 3 years? How often do we have to replace batteries? How about cards? How about strobes? What kind of ongoing maintenance does does it look like?
Yeah. So the service is the maintenance contract. So if a device was to go offline, we have visibility into that. You also, have a dashboard where you can see those things as well. We come out and replace them up and running. If your badges are running low, critically low, we either come out and replace the batteries, or we replace the actual badges as part of the service. If a kid knocked one of the devices, one of the strobes off with a broom handle, right, and that it's now broken and offline, we come out and just replace it. It's all part of the service that we offer when we implement this.
Okay, so just to be clear, initial price to start up, and then a service fee yearly. Okay.
Yep.
And full disclosure, the budget request that's included currently, which you all have seen as part of the budget request for plant operations, includes the startup cost and first year annual fee. So this would be, if we were to proceed, of course, this is all, would have to go through a negotiation process. It would be a 5-year contract.
Did we look at other systems as well? Or this is the one that you believe is the best fit?
Yes. We reviewed 3 total systems, and there aren't, but excuse me, surprisingly, there are not a lot of companies offering this kind of service. So Centegix is definitely the leader as far as our focus group went. And the 2 other vendors that we asked, showed up and did a very good job. But as far as a fully developed implementation, Centegix is by far the leader.
Did we get input from the Sheriff's Department and first responders on this as well?
Yeah, they were part of the focus group that we had. So they were there, and including, directors from both and Sheriff Gamble and so on.
And following that, I know admin and teachers were part of the focus group, but do we have a large, I'm curious to hear what the teachers, staff, and admin think of this.
Yeah, so we didn't have teachers part of the focus group because it's hard to get them pulled up. Excuse me, geez. But we did have administrators there, and we've got nothing but positive feedback. It really is an empowerment for staff, and it is a security, and I say security, but I don't mean to be redundant, but it is a little bit of a, what am I going to say? Security blanket for them, to have that with them at all times and have an immediate response.
Teachers and staff behind you.
I was just going to mention that we do use this device in the healthcare space an awful lot now. It does provide just the secure sense of having a quick alert if you were to need to use your button. The only thing that I would caution or just make the district aware of is you need to apply a lot of education and policy around the use of them. Now, I was reading about your specific device at Centegix, specifically around some of the counties that are already using them, and there are quite a bit of reviews around false activations, and I think some of that may be applied to maybe those one-offs with nerves, when you think that you pressed the button 3 times but you actually pressed it 8 times, and they're locking down the school system. So I did read some reviews around that, so I'm just wondering about your thoughts around those specific schools, and I believe those were in Georgia.
Yeah, no, it's great. And I think we touched on this earlier. Has it happened? Sure, it has happened. Usually what it comes down to is training and education. And like you had said, setting policy for what the badge is going to be used for, right? And talking through some different scenarios of how it's going to be used, and kind of walking folks through the training, not just how to press the button and the situation that you're in, but thinking through and setting policies around when you're going to do that, right? What it's to be used for and what it's not to be used for.
And do the badges ever deactivate themselves?
No, but you can actually deactivate them. So if, for instance, on the badge, I don't know if you can see this, I'll hold it up. There is a QR code. That's how you register it to a person, right? So when you're getting the system set up, you register it to the person. It's that person's badge. That's how the system knows that it's a specific person that needs help and shows where they are, right? For instance, if somebody misplaced their badge or lost it, you can go into the system, call up the person's name and see what badge was associated with them and deactivate the badge from the platform.
I'm sorry, we touched on this. How does the badge alert the administrator or the person, the response team? Does their badge start to do something? Do they get a phone call
No, that's a good question. So the person in need of help presses their button 3 times. Let's say it's a staff alert. It goes out to the response team. Whoever we designate is the response team in the building. On their phones, right, is the responder app. That's where the map comes up with the person that needs the help. That also comes up on their computer screen at the same time, right? So the alert is coming up in 2 different places, on the phone and on their computer screen. And that's how the response team receives the alert.
Mr. Schaefer, are you comfortable with that in all of our buildings, knowing especially certain ones don't have great cell phone service and our Wi-Fi comes in and out? Is that an effective way to get the message to the people who need to get it?
So the beauty of the system is that it doesn't depend on Wi-Fi or cellular service, but it does bring up a good question. And John, I hope you can hear me. Ms. Jackson is asking, we do have buildings that have limited cell phone service. If we're in one of those buildings that has limited cell phone service, would the notification make it through the system to the administrator's cell phone or the SRO cell phone?
Yeah. Yep, it comes up as an SMS notification, right? Yep. So just think of like an Amber Alert. It's very, very similar type of notification that would come up on the phone.
So, because you said we don't need cell phone service or Wi-Fi, but the person receiving the notification needs the service. So it would still come up. I'm not sure. I mean, I don't know how that works. Does Amber Alert still, like, what if you don't have cell phone service? It still comes up?
Yes. Yeah. So the badge, right? The badge it communicates to the locating beacons through a low frequency Bluetooth network, right? So it's not touching cell phone service. That's how this communicates with the locating beacons. And then the locating beacons communicate with the gateway. The gateway we install, it's the only device as part of the system that needs to be hardwired. All the other parts of the solution are battery operated. Okay. So that's how it communicates out. And it has the failover and the battery backup. So if your network goes down, it's still working.
Does it have a chain of command? For example, I assume the alert goes to the principal and one of the APs. What if somebody is sick or unavailable? Or, I mean, there have been times in our buildings when multiple admin are out. It happens. Yeah. Does it bump down to somebody else, or is it kind of like, oh no one's here, too bad for you?
There's not a chain of command in that sense. But that's why we have a response team, right? We have multiple people receiving that alert at the same time. So typically the response team is 4 to 5. It could be more people. Typically, depends on your buildings, your staff and the support you have.
So the program that I am used to using, I could manipulate who the response team was for that particular day or that particular weekend. Is it the same for this program?
Who the response team is?
Correct. So if 3 of my staff members are out for that particular day, I can reroute the response to someone else, or a whole different team of 5. Is that possible?
That's configurable in the system. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Oh, hey guys, thank you so much for making time. Hopefully I answered all the questions. If there's other questions that come up, just feel free to reach out or channel them through Kevin.
John, thank you very much once again. Appreciate the information. Okay.
Absolutely. Have a good night.
I like it.
Can I ask you a question? Have we? I know that we get safety grants locally. Have we looked into any larger grants for safety or anything that could help offset this cost? It's considerable.
So the problem is that the largest grant that we have available is through the Maryland Center for School Safety, and it's a capital improvements grant. So this would not qualify for that. There are smaller grants, but much smaller, that come through Maryland Center for School Safety, where it could get 25,000 or something like that. And I'm not sure we're certainly investigating it. Right now this is in the investigatory, if that's the right word, stages. We will do everything we can to try and fund it in any kind of grant situation we can.
I know there are some that have been born out of tragedies. There are grants that are available through other very unfortunate events, and I wonder, if that would be an appropriate avenue to look down, or if they have any awareness about grants or have had any of their districts pay for it with grant money. If they know anything or could share anything with you.
So, I mean, yes, certainly we can explore all avenues for grants. One thing that I would say is that the budget information that's included right now is a top line number, meaning the maximum that it could be. The budget that I asked them to work up included the YMCA at the St. Michael's campus. It included the early Head Start and Head Start building on the Easton Elementary School campus, just because they're so close. And that does add a pretty considerable amount. And so as we get closer and go through the budget process, those are things that maybe we could even ask for local support, because really we're talking about, health department daycares and, stuff. So it could be a county expense that comes out of that, or they're removed, and lessen the amount. And the other thing is there's lots of options that John covered. I mean, we have a working visitor management system now. We don't have to go with that, but it's included in that pricing that we have. So there's options here if we need to reduce that number.
The visitor thing, is that something you can make school specific?
Yes, there's a cost per school for the visitor management. So yes, I do believe, and I'd have to confirm that with John, but I do believe that we could say, hey, we want this at Easton Elementary School, but we don't need it, at the high schools or whatever. Yeah, or Tillman, right? And that is another thing that there is a flat cost. It's when I speak to the implementation at buildings, there is a flat cost for that. So I guess what I'm saying is, and John and I have discussed this, that there is an opportunity for us to find a way to make the budget more palatable if we need to do that. And of course, we're going to look for the best bang for our buck here. And so I just want to be clear that, once again, the budget is a top line number. It could be reduced based on the decisions that we make and a negotiation process that we have to go through, we're required to go through to procure this service.
Have you talked with other schools that have used this?
So a lot of the schools that have this in place are not in Maryland. As John kind of alluded to, they're very large on the West Coast and in Georgia and Florida. All of the similar to Mr. Highbury, a lot of the research that I've done is just online and looking at information that's coming from school systems on it, and I would say that it's generally very positive. But I do echo that concern. It is something about that we need to be, kind of our eyes open with the false alerts. It is something that I've seen as well. But as John said, and I do agree with this, that it would be very much about training staff and making them comfortable with this tool that they would have. It's not it's not meant to be used for any small situation. So,
Do you think there's any chance that we could get a bunch of other Maryland schools on board and maybe get some better pricing for like a group?
So we're public here. I don't want to say anything out of turn, but I do think that there could be an incentive for being the first Maryland district to go with it. But it is.
I'm sorry to keep it going, but what is the process now in the school system if they just the teachers get on the.
So, I mean, that it's a great question, and it is something that, I was school-based for 15 years or whatever. And I would just put it this way, that this is an area, and which is why we're focused on it, where we could really improve. Response times in seconds mean a lot, when it comes to a real emergency. And that's the biggest thing that, it depends on the school. It depends on the staffing and resources. It's obviously we made huge strides in hardening our schools through security vestibules and other hardening improvements. We've obviously improved our safety in our schools with our SRO coverage. That's a huge deal to have a staff member at each building. But we do have a notification system that could be improved upon when there's an emergency in a school building.
Thank you. I do appreciate not being reactionary when it comes to safety in schools.
Does anybody else have questions for Mr. Schaefer? I'm sure this will come back to us again.
Yeah. So once again, this was strictly informational, and wanted the board to be aware of what we're pushing here, as far as the budget process goes. I just want to say one last thing, that there was very strong support, from the county on this and being included in that process. And it does, and I don't think we really talked about it, but it does kind of meet the state requirement for school mapping. So that's an added benefit. There's a law in place now where we are required to provide, the necessary communication between emergency services and emergency responders and the electronic mapping of our schools. This does meet that requirement, which is why I believe that we would be able to get some grant funding through MCSS. Unfortunately, that grant funding isn't in place yet, but it's expected to take place because it is a burden on school systems to do this.
Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Schaefer. This is very interesting and insightful. And that is the end of our planned work session agenda today. So we'll go ahead and adjourn, and hopefully we'll see everybody back here on Wednesday for our regular meeting. Thank you so much, everybody. Good night.